Hey y'all, welcome to I Got a Story to Tell. I'm your host, Niambi Kiesha, holistic wellness practitioner, hoodoo spiritist, and Bronx native. And during our time together, I will share some of my musings on all things life, spirit, plants, and parenting. So get comfortable and let's dive right in. Hey y'all, and welcome to another episode of I Got a Story to Tell, the Niambi Kiesha podcast. So, this week we find ourselves right at the tail end of the month of June. And so, in this episode, I am going to talk about the celebration of Juneteenth, which we just had last week. I'm also going to talk about hoodoo, what it is, a little bit of what it's not. You know, I am a hoodoo spiritist. We also just entered Cancer season, so I will touch on that a little bit. And tied in with Cancer season, we will talk about the importance of rest, restoration, and integration. So let's jump right in. So this past Thursday, we celebrated Juneteenth. Juneteenth is held annually on June 19th. It was made a federal holiday June 19th, I want to say 2021. So just relatively recently. But for anyone that may not be familiar, Juneteenth is the acknowledgement of the day that the final enforcement of the Emancipation Proclamation took place in Texas. And essentially, what that means is that 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, which was the official ending of slavery, 2.5 years later, there were still slaves or there were still enslaved Africans in Texas. And it wasn't until 1865 that those final enslaved Africans received word that slavery had been ended. It started in 1863. So Juneteenth is, I won't say interesting because that's not really, I really feel like interesting is a filler word when there just really isn't language, right, for what it is that needs to be expressed or conveyed. But Juneteenth is a day that highlights the idea that something that was communicated in one place that was intended to impact an entire um, group of people did not make its way, right? Did not make its way in a timely manner, did not make its way in an equitable manner, right? When I wrote down that I wanted to talk about Juneteenth in this episode, I really wasn't 100% sure where I was going to go with it. Um, I just knew that I was recording and I knew that I wanted to highlight the importance of this date. Um, and I wanted to speak to it as well as a few other themes that are going on at this time of year. But as I began to prepare, the thing that it made me realize is that the core, the essence of Juneteenth, the essence of something not being equitable. Because even if the argument is, you know, in those times, the way that information was carried, you know, it took time, or Texas was in the deep south, or whatever, whatever, whatever. The reality is, it was not equitable. And as I sit here today in 2025, in the work that I do in my day to day job, we are still facing scenarios where information spreads in a manner that is not equitable. We are still seeing today that one slice of a community, right, can receive information, access, um, advancements at a pace that by the time others receive it, it's outdated. We've already moved on to the next thing. And while Juneteenth highlights that when it came to enslaved Africans, there was still a separation in the equity of the experience of enslaved Africans that were in the North versus those that were in the southernmost um, parts of our country. And now, while we are not talking about enslaved Africans, we are talking about communities, we are talking about Americans, right, that should be receiving access to care, access to education, access to technology. And we see still in real time that that access makes its way to some pockets of the community at a faster speed and a faster rate than it does to our more marginalized communities. And it was really just having that awareness that made me think, so what now? Right? We have this holiday, we have this acknowledgement that this happened in 1865, but we are seeing a version or an iteration of it continuing to happen in 2025. And so, what now? And what I would offer is the what now is that those of us that are in community, and I'm not only saying African Americans, I'm saying anyone that is in community, right, with their fellow citizen, their fellow human being, and they see the inequities, they see the speed and the rate at which information can make it to one pocket and not to another. I feel that the task and the call is to figure out how you can contribute to the timely, the equitable, the fair, the just distribution of resources, of knowledge, of education, of technology to our marginalized brothers and sisters and communities. How can you contribute to ensuring that these things that I just shared are made readily available to everyone? And that answer is going to be different for each of us. It's very much so a personal journey. It is very much so an internal reflection about what your call is, what your gift is, what access you have, and how you can use that for the betterment of the collective, the betterment of society. For each of us, we have something very specific to ourselves, to our makeup. There's a reason why we are here in this day, this age, this time, this season, right? Again, going back to the idea of community, community building, and that those of us that are here for a reason. And we're watching things unfold minute by minute, day by day. And the only answer is to go inward and figure out what your innate internal passion, purpose, gift is, and begin to pour that out into the world. The very thing that you have is the very thing that the world needs. We are all pieces of a puzzle that if we open our mouths, if we open ourselves up, if we open our hearts, if we share our thoughts and share our ideas that are for the betterment, the improvement, the benefit. If it's not for one of those reasons, then no. I'm not just saying everybody open their mouth for the sake of having their mouth open. But if you're hearing my voice, you are likely someone that resonates with my message. And my message is around tapping into who we are beyond the physical or the surface or the matrix or whatever you want to call it. And so that would be my offer today. On the heels of this Juneteenth holiday celebration that we just came out of in 2025, acknowledging that that same dynamic is playing out daily, and then figuring out what it is that you have been called to offer, contribute, lift up, give, serve, pray, do, be in support of closing that gap. The gap that was 2.5 years from 1863 to 1865 that caused enslaved Africans to remain in a state that they were essentially freed from. But how do we close this gap in real time? How do we close this gap in 2025 in various areas? Healthcare, housing, right? I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the homelessness situation in this city is out of control, right? How do we close the gap on just human necessity, right? How do we close the gap in that way? So that is the message that I would bring around Juneteenth um, in this episode. And for me, that directly ties into my spiritual grounding, which is hoodoo. And so on Juneteenth, I facilitated a workshop that was about the introduction of hoodoo because there are quite a few people that have heard the term but are not quite sure what it is or what it isn't. We recently had a movie, Sinners, come out with Michael B. Jordan. And interestingly, I joked about it because I said there was so much hoopla about hoodoo in that movie that that's what got me to go see the movie. Now, I'm not going to give away too much of the movie and it's been out for a while. I think it's streaming now. But spoiler alert, it's not a hoodoo movie. It is a horror film about vampires that happens to have some hoodoo in it, which is two very different things. So I joked with someone and said, I got tricked because I don't go see horror movies. I don't go see scary movies, but I went because of all of the hoodoo connection that was in the movie. And so I'm just going to share a few points, right? This is not going to be a whole session or a workshop or a class, but I am going to just raise up what hoodoo is, what it isn't, right? And then if you want to go further or if you have any deeper questions that you would like to explore, you can always reach out to me on any of my platforms. And I also offer spiritual guidance sessions. So if anything needs to go deeper, we can absolutely arrange for that. But hoodoo is a spiritual practice that was created here in the States. That's the first thing, is that it is not an African traditional religion. It is not an ATR. It was not created on the continent. It was created here in the States by enslaved Africans. It does have origins that tie back to African traditional religions, and it has origins that tie back to the continent. The other misnomer about hoodoo is that it is voodoo, and it is not. So I will start by saying that voodoo is actually pronounced vaudou. If you are referring to Haitian vaudou, and the thing that I will offer about that, while hoodoo is not voodoo, the voodoo of most individuals' understanding is a bastardized version of an African traditional religion, right? That was, marked up or painted a picture of just being this evil devil worship. And that is not what it is, right? Again, I won't go into details about it, but I will offer that I just want to make clear that while I'm saying hoodoo is not voodoo, I'm not saying it because hoodoo is this and voodoo is devil worship, because that's not what it is. So, if you have any questions about voodoo, I definitely encourage you to do your research. That's my number one thing. As I go into speaking about hoodoo and my practices, the number one thing that I believe is that any individual should feel confident enough in themselves and their practice to be able to do research. And if you are unable to do research because your practice is uncertain enough that you believe that simply through research something could get on you or take hold of you, then there's a bigger issue. Because we, as knowledgeable, grown individuals, should be able to read something, research something, gain an understanding for something, even if it is not the thing that we practice. And research, understanding, and reading is not practice, it is not worship. So if you are too scared to read a book about anything, I invite you to go inward and figure out where your faith really lies. What solid ground are you truly standing on? What is your backing? What is your anchor? Because we should be able to read and research without fear of what's going to get on us, right? So that's that. Back to hoodoo. Hoodoo is a set of practices and rituals that was created here in the States by enslaved Africans. It is a combination or has origins in African traditional religion, and then was adapted um, to the Christian religion, which was the religion of the enslavers that was placed on the enslaved. And so, if you read and research, you will see things um, that will show up, the idea of the black church, right? The reason why there's a black church, and there is a black church, and when I say the black church, I don't just mean the church where black people go, because black people can go to all different churches, but the experience in the black church, the experience of worship, the use of music and sound and drums, right, is all innate to who we are. It is all a part of our DNA, and it stems from these practices that came over with our ancestors from the continent. When you look at hoodoo, there are things that people do on a daily basis that are rooted in hoodoo. Okay? So if you light a candle when someone passes away, that is rooted in hoodoo. It is the lighting of the way, it is the prayer of their spirit to be able to have a peaceful transition. If you set up a memorial when you lose a loved one, that is rooted in the practice of ancestor veneration in hoodoo. And it is not worship. In hoodoo, we do not worship our ancestors, but we venerate them. We remember them. We're in reciprocal relationship with them. So when you set up a memorial, when you put their favorite food or drink, when you put a teddy bear when it was a young child, when you put balloons, when you put flowers, that is giving an offering that is rooted in hoodoo. When you pour out liquor for your dead homies or for those that have passed, that is pouring libation for your ancestors. So some of us are walking around practicing hoodoo, calling it, maybe not calling it anything, maybe just believing it's what we have done, which it is what we have done, because traditionally in the African American culture community, our rituals, our practices are passed down through storytelling, through seeing and doing. So there may not have been a word for it, there may not have been language for it. Nobody may have ever called it hoodoo, right? But you saw it done. You heard your grandmother and Mima and Nana and your aunties and your uncles talking about it and doing it, right? And so hoodoo is really the language for who we are spiritually. And it's also the language for the acknowledgement that we are not walking this walk on our own. That my journey as Niambi did not start April 25th, 1979. It did not. It started generation upon generation upon generation upon generation upon generation before me. And so, what those individuals did, what they endured, how they showed up is in my DNA and it was passed down. But the world that we live in has become so convoluted and so transactional and so consumerist based that when we are looking for answers, we often go looking outward. When we're looking for answers for pain in our body, we often go looking to doctors instead of going into meditation, asking our body what it needs, and then going out into nature and retrieving those things. When we need to feel soothed or to work through heavy emotions, we often go looking outward. We often go look for whatever type of ease that we may find, whether it is anesthetizing or if it's shopping or whatever it is, as opposed to going inward, reflecting on what our thoughts are, what we feel, and then maybe going out to the ocean and turning all of that over and releasing it into the water, or maybe going and standing out in the grass and envisioning our feet being grounded down and feeling all of the heavy energy drain out of our feet and giving it back to Mother Earth, who is well equipped to take it, and then allowing newness to come and radiate down through the crown of our head, through our crown chakra, into our third eye, into our throat chakra, how we communicate, into our heart chakra, sacral chakra, solar plexus, sacral root, right? Allowing it to reverberate and refill us. Spending time in the sun so that we can get the vitamins and the radiant light and feel the warmth on our skins. All of this is hoodoo. All of this is the use of every tool, resource, mineral, herb, relating and connecting to the insects, the animals, the birds. I say all the time, understanding that we are a part of this process. We are a part of this natural cycle. We are not separate from it. That's why we're born and we die, right? Because we are a part of this cycle. That there is cycles of death and rebirth all throughout our physical experience, right? And so I share that hoodoo is a remembering. It is a remembering of who we are at our core. It is a connection and a remembering that we are representations, iterations of God, of the divine, right? And that when we remember that and embrace that and hold on to that, nothing that comes up in this physical material world can take us off of that square. And it's not to say that there's not difficulties, and it's not to say that perseverance is not required. It's not to say any of that. But it's to say that when you are sure, like I started on, when you know where your foundation is, when you know what square you stand on, then you can move through the face of some of these difficulties in life and see them for what they truly are, just an opportunity. An opportunity to decide how you're going to look at it. An opportunity to decide, are you going to go over it, under it, around it? Are you going to just sit and wait for it to pass? The whole purpose of us being here is to have a physical experience. Everything that happens, everything that we are faced with is part of the physical experience. That's what we're here for. Okay. And so hoodoo is a spiritual practice that helps ground us. But the other thing that I would say about hoodoo is, like I said, it is in your DNA. So my hoodoo is going to look different than your hoodoo, because my hoodoo is tied to my mother and father and their 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 mother and father, right? And so my hoodoo is tied to my line. I actually read something today that also talked about in-laws, right? So I know that my hoodoo is tied to my in-laws. I know that there is no question in my mind that my in-laws from my previous marriage were intended to meet me on this plane, right? And the ones that have gone on are still with me in the spirit. There's no question in my mind about that, right? And so hoodoo allows us to just give framework to what we already know, to what we're doing. It allows us to give language if language is important to you. And it allows us to have some baseline practices, but be careful not to get caught up. It is not religion, it is not by the book. You should not be doing the exact same thing that your next door neighbor is doing. You should not be trying to do to the letter things that I'm doing, right? So my hoodoo, I had to tap in. My hoodoo is tied to nature. My hoodoo is tied to a very physical, tangible practice, which is also tied to the fact that I'm a Taurus. I'm a earth sign. I'm very grounded. I'm very slow moving. I'm very, the whole everything that everybody got to say about Taurus, right? But that's my story. So yeah, you'll see me kitchen witching. You'll see me making Florida water because I like the things in my hands. I like to feel it. I like to smell it. I like the senses. That's the Taurus in me. But somebody else's hoodoo might look like something completely different. Somebody else's hoodoo might look like being out at the ocean. Somebody else's hoodoo might look like candle magic. Somebody else's hoodoo might look like, shamanic work. It could be any number of things. The key is always going into a meditative state to get the answers that you desire. So, hoodoo, what is it? It is a collection of spiritual practices rooted in ancestor veneration, grounded in African traditional religions from the continent, brought over by our enslaved ancestors with a history of resistance, of jubilation, right? Of joy. That's the other thing about hoodoo, that sometimes we can just get caught up in the work of it, the work of it, the work of it, right? We're African Americans here in this country. I started out by saying that we're seeing some of the same cycles that happen with Juneteenth, where things are still inequitable, things are still hard, and it can be easy to get caught up in trying to fix it, trying to make it right, trying to resist, trying to do the work. And I'm not saying that that's not important. If you know me at all, you know that I'm a relatively intense and serious person. And I believe that the work that I've been called to do is intense and serious. But I've also been reminded in a number of ways, recently and in the past, about the importance of joy. That's why my nails are yellow. The sun, which is going to bring me to Cancer season, right? That there is power in resting, there's power in restoration, that sometimes the work is laughter, sometimes the work is peace, sometimes the work is love and ooey gooey goodness and being with your love, whether that's romantic, familial, friends, right? Sometimes the work is being out in the sun. We just started Cancer season. Cancer is all about home, nurturing, maternal energy. And it made me think, we hit Juneteenth, this information has been shared, right? Like, yes, we see Juneteenth as Jubilation Day and a day for celebration in 2025, but how did those enslaved Africans feel 2.5 years later? Maybe what's required right after Juneteenth is rest, which they didn't have the option, right? Because what we do know is there was freedom that was given with no resources, right? No making sure that these newly freed Americans had something to get started with. So essentially, one day they were not free, the next day they were free, but their work never stopped. It couldn't stop. But we have the privilege of rest. And so, what's come to me, I believe, ritual that I will begin to um, impart or incorporate in my life from here on out, is Juneteenth will symbolize the day that I will take 4 weeks of rest, that I won't work hard, that I'll frolic in the sun and go to the beach and eat fresh fruit and drink cucumber lemon water, because my ancestors couldn't do that. That I'll go lay out at the park and listen to music and laugh and eat mangoes and all sorts of things and play with my children and blow bubbles and find joy for the sacrifice that they made, right? Juneteenth is June 19th, 1865. And I'm confident that my ancestors were not resting on June 20th, 1865. So, this Cancer season, I welcome you to find some joy, find some rest, find some restoration, and allow yourself an opportunity to integrate the work that you've been doing since January. Reflect back. Reflect back on whatever resolutions that you set at the beginning of January. But when you get to June, don't talk about how much you have left to go until December. And that's if you set resolutions in January, or if you started your astrological season in April with Aries season, whatever it was. Just allow this to be a moment of reflection, but reflection, celebration, and rest, not reflection to just remind yourself how much more you have to do. We deserve rest purely because we do, right? Same way that grace is unmerited favor. This society, this culture will have us believe that we should be working, 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 toiling, toiling, toiling until the day comes that we can rest because we have everything that we need. But we have everything that we need today. We have everything that we need in this moment. And if we can believe that, then the best way to honor our ancestors, those enslaved Africans, that got information 2.5 years later, the best way to honor them is through rest and joy, laughter, restoration, peace, family, food, all of the senses, all of it. And allow yourself to feel what it feels like to receive joy, to experience joy. Because so often we don't. And especially if you are in any type of social justice type work, it will run you into the ground. So I invite you to join me for 4 weeks of rest, 4 weeks of joy, 4 weeks of laughter, 4 weeks of restoration, 4 weeks of honoring our ancestors. Okay? All right. Y'all have a good one, and I will see you here next week. Take care.